Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pat's Creative Podcast, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Wouldn't you guess? They're all special guests. It's pretty crazy. It's almost like everybody's special in their own way at some point. But I am joined by another special guest today, and that is, of course, Really Freakin Clever, also known as Josh. Josh, would you care to introduce yourself to the people out there?
Hi, my name's Josh. If you know me on the internet, it's probably for one of two things. I do both the self-titled Really Freakin Clever show on YouTube, which talks about video game design, and then I also used to do the comedy series 64 Things Wrong with insert video game that I wanted to make fun of here. So I'm a content creator. I was making videos and streaming on YouTube since 2013, so I've been doing this for 8 years. And these days I'm kind of was on a bit of a creative hiatus for a while, but I'm recently coming back kind of in a more musical direction. And yeah, I'm a man of a lot of different areas at the moment.
Sure. And I only personally discovered you or at least fully started watching your content relatively recently, but you're mentioning like you've been doing this for 8 years. I have vivid memories of at least seeing your thumbnails just through like recommended and stuff like that, and I'm always kicking myself for not checking you out sooner because you actually make a lot of really cool content. But I remember just scrolling through like your channel feed and seeing all these old like the blue style thumbnails. I'm like, oh man, I remember seeing those all the time. If only I had indulged sooner. But yeah, it is interesting you brought up the music thing because in my head, this is kind of some meta talk, but I was originally thinking we were going to start recording this last week. So I had like all my questions prepared and I was ready. And then it turns out I just got the date wrong and it was actually this week. But it's actually kind of good that we waited because there's been a new video of yours that's uploaded since then, actually yesterday as of the recording time. And I guess that might be kind of a good place to start since you mentioned it. For how long have you been interested in music creation, and do you feel like you're kind of shifting more towards that in general, or do you think is there things you prefer about music production over video production? What's your general thought process on that?
So for me, music was a huge kind of part of my life growing up, like my teenage years, kind of, I guess, especially. I was in like all the school bands and things like that, and wanted to like be a rock star with my friends, and like started a band and would play at like friends' birthday parties and things like that. And it was all mostly like just like classic rock covers and stuff whenever I was a kid, and that was kind of like my identity in high school. Like it's almost like a meme actually on my YouTube channel that I used to have like hair down to my shoulders and a little like chin patch and stuff like that. Like I look like the most cliche like heavy metal like stoner dude. So I used to kind of really be super into like rock music and playing rock music and everything like that. And it was actually something whenever I went to university was around the time that I started YouTube. And so as I stopped kind of doing music was when I started doing YouTube. So that there wasn't a lot of crossover at first. And eventually it was kind of something that I kept in my life a little bit because I did musicals at university, and there was a lot of kind of the more I guess known jokes in my community from some of my videos were like song parodies and things like that. So I kept up with music a little bit, but it was only actually recently in the last 6 months or so during the whole quarantine that we found ourselves in that I really started kind of reconnecting with, oh my gosh, like I actually forgot that I really enjoy songwriting, and I really enjoy kind of exploring like doing original music that wasn't just like based at comedy or wasn't like a parody song and stuff like that. So yeah, it was really interesting to kind of realize that, oh, I used to be really into this, and I kind of stopped because a different kind of creative venture kind of like took my interest for a while. But then now I'm kind of circling around back to it, and the last few months have been kind of like fitting it back into my life and finding out, okay, well, I'm like mostly known for making like video game comedy videos or something like that. How can I kind of how can I fit this new kind of ambitions with music that I have into what I've already kind of like built up for myself on the internet?
Sure. And so you kind of stopped doing music stuff when you went into university. You weren't taking like educational music courses, or
Yeah, it was. So I went to university, and initially I was going for computer science, but I wound up getting a degree in theater, and so I did. I did a lot of musicals and stuff at the university, but the thing was that the actual music program at the university was one of like the super hardcore like Bachelor of Music, like you're going to eventually become a professional like orchestra player or something like that.
Sure.
So there was a lot of people that were in the actual programs that I kind of hung out with and got to be in musicals with. But it wasn't why I was there at university.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it always kind of felt like, oh, well, I can't like be in a band or something like that. Like everyone else that's kind of into that stuff is like at the professional level and like literally going to university for this. So it was a little bit of just like kind of natural, like different hobbies and different interests like kind of took over while I was at school. But there was also a decent amount of it where it was like, oh, well, the people that are into music here are like really into music and like know their stuff. Whereas I was a drummer and like I know a little bit of music theory and stuff, but it's like the very basic, like I play these chords on the guitar and they sound nice.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting because you hear a lot of stories of people going a different direction from a degree because the program they have at their university is less robust. And it's interesting to hear the perspective of someone kind of avoiding it because it's almost too intense and too, I guess, good, for lack of a better word, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you hadn't really planned on ever being a full-time musician, basically?
Yeah, no, because I was really into music in high school, but whenever I talked about it to like to guidance counselors or like my music teacher at the time, like I was very into like rock drumming and like rock singing and things like that, and it was like, well, you can't really go to university, or at least like the schools that I was looking at, you couldn't really like study in like that kind of musicianship, or even any time that I super did like look into like the theory of like drumming and things like that. Like I was never one to like really be in depth with the rudiments and stuff like that. And so I was kind of, I guess, like warned against like if you want to like have music be your job like through university. And I was at the point in my life where it's like, yeah, I go to university after high school. That's just obviously what you do. Where I have a bit of a different perspective on that now. But at the time, it was like, yeah, if you go to university for music, like that, it's hardcore and it's like super in depth, and that didn't really appeal to me as much. So I was like, I'm gonna go in a different direction, and then I'll do like music on the side and still try and keep up with that.
But you kind of didn't do music on the side. Is that what you're saying, for a while?
Yeah, like I wound up kind of after the first few months of university, because initially I was there for computer science was what I was initially planning to do. But then I also kind of found in a similar situation, I didn't click with that as well either.
Same here. I was computer science, and then I switched over to graphic design. I was like, this is not what I was expecting.
Yeah, it was like that introductory course and like kind of like the base logic behind like computer programming was really interesting to me. But then like the second that the complicated math like got in there, like the second it had to go to the level past that, I was like, oh, if the rest of this is like, if that's what the rest of this is like, I don't think I'm as into that.
Sure.
But I was lucky at the time because I got involved in kind of the musical theater like side programs. Like they weren't for classes or anything like that. It was an extracurricular thing at my university.
Right.
But the musical theater kind of opened me to an actual like theater degree, and that's what I wound up getting. Was I got my degree in acting and everything. But the music part of it, I kind of just kept it at like, oh, I'll sing in these musicals because I have like a decent singing voice. But I never like went super hard on the like studying that, or like I'm gonna do music with my life or anything like that.
Well, now, what do you think the biggest draw to music is for you? Are you more interested in the the performing of it with regards to playing instruments and whatnot and improving your craft in that style? Are you more interested in the songwriting or singing specifically? Like, what do you think's the biggest draw to it?
I think honestly the biggest draw is similar to like what I like about streaming and like YouTube stuff, where I think it's my draw to entertain people and like
Sure.
create for people specifically, because I'm never whenever I write songs, it's never like, oh, I want to make like a super complex like piece or anything like that. Like
Sure.
I like to write music that people are going to enjoy, that's going to get like stuck in people's
Right.
heads. Like I find myself writing a lot of like really poppy stuff. Oh, like that was a really catchy song, or like,
Yeah.
or hearing someone say like that's stuck in my head. Like for me, the most important thing is always just being like making someone smile, or just like,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
like making accommodating pieces as opposed to pieces that kind of stand on their own. Like a lot of musicians feel like they have a message they need to send with their work, and for people to hear that message. From what I
Mm.
understand, what you're saying, it's more of something to entertain them for a period of time, almost relying on escapism or just easing whatever they're doing while they listen to it, right?
I think it, yeah, I wouldn't say that I don't have any value in like what I'm singing about, because
Sure,
there
sure.
is songs that I've written that like that are important to me, and that I like, that like, oh, I think it's good that I'm singing about this, and I hope
For
people
sure.
like think about this more. Like the song that I just put out was a bit kind of I wrote it during quarantine, kind of about my own sexuality, and like exploring that kind of through
Sure.
a piece of music. But at the same time, I'm not trying to think of anything as in like I need to make an important statement with
Right.
this song, or like or I need to like make my mark like right now. Like I want to just, whenever I'm songwriting, it's the stuff that's important to me, the things that are on my mind.
Right.
But there also is that aspect of like, I want it to be approachable to people, and I want them to be able to get something out of it. Because I think like if I wrote like a 9-minute like song like from the depths of my soul or whatever,
Sure.
but no one wants to listen to that, like that's less like impactful to me, I think. So
Right.
I like kind of finding that balance.
Yeah, so a mix of like self-articulation, but then also audience reception of how they hear what you're saying and they understand your purpose, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still in a
And
digestible way.
yeah, and that's kind of like, that's my approach at the start. Like I might eventually like do some more what's the word, self-indulgent. I don't mean that in like a negative way at all, but
Sure.
I might eventually like shift like the balance of how I kind of view those things
Sure.
like for different projects. But at the moment, yeah, I kind of enjoy balancing those two aspects.
Well, then I'm going to try to transition this into more into video making and ask if you have that same kind of purpose with the works you create for YouTube or for streaming. Like, do you feel like you are also doing this give and take of how much of your personal affection is put into your work, or do you think it's more of a form of just entertaining yourself when you're streaming or making videos?
I think when it comes to streaming, streaming for me is a lot more like a lot more live and kind of loose. So my approach to streaming, especially kind of lately, has been like less thinking about like, oh, what's like, how's the audience gonna react to this, or like I need to play this game to like get people interested or something like that. Like I've tried to look at streaming from less that perspective, because I like streaming to kind of be like alive, like this is what I'm up to today, and
Sure.
just kind of naturally bounce off whatever the audience brings. But that is also something that I do a lot in videos, because especially with later on episodes kind of Really Freakin Clever, I don't place myself like as one of like the top tier like video essay people or
Sure.
anything like that. Like there's a lot of really, really smart people on YouTube that are
Right.
talking about video games and video game design. And
Right.
whenever I started out on YouTube, there was a lot less people doing that. But like these days, like there's a lot of really well-informed people giving like really good like video game design takes. And so my kind of process is like, okay, I don't have the biggest brain like in the room for anymore for like these video game stuff, but I do still have like that desire to like entertain people. And so kind of the balance that I tried to go for was like getting these ideas across and like having that like clever thing about a video game that I want to impart on people, but also trying to give it kind of the same energy that I bring to a lot of like my comedy and kind of like joke about the games, so that I'm not focusing on like why like this game is the most important work in like the entire medium. I want to like say this thing is cool and like I hope I can make you like laugh about it, and then by the end of the video you are also like, oh yeah, that is cool, like I did get something from this.
So it again is a mix of trying to perform and entertain people, but also you are sharing your emotional responses to these pieces of work, right?
Yeah, you're trying to smuggle in like that idea, like with a Trojan horse of entertainment.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I think, just to briefly go back to music, I think that's what a lot of pop songs do too, and it might be why you're drawn to them, is because they do like to bring in their emotional response, but packaged in a way where you don't immediately hear it, you might not immediately notice it, but it still resonates with you. And ultimately, when we indulge in art, we're not usually the same person before and after, even if it's just to an nth degree. And even pop songs can do that, right?
Yeah, I have a big fascination with like popular media, or like the big like forms of entertainment and how that impacts people.
Right.
Whether that is like through pop songs or whatever, or like movies, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like I'm big into the superhero movies and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I would never say like these are the finest like cinematic films like ever crafted and like things like that. But I find it really interesting that like obviously something's connecting like with people if they're so popular, and then like what ideas are they like sneaking in like to the audience, or like whenever something big like does find a way to also have a message, like a movie like Thor Ragnarok or things like that. Like I love whenever people are able to find a balance of something that's able to connect to a lot of people and that people are like genuinely enjoying and happy about, but also has like a deeper level to it as well.
Definitely. Well, and I think there's something really common in both the movie critique industry and the gaming critique industry, where it's very much consumer oriented, where people are very concerned about bang for buck and how it affects the player. And not that those aren't important thoughts to have, but I feel like when you go so far in that route, you kind of lose track of just the core of playing a game, which is how you feel, or the core of watching a movie, which is how you respond to it. And I'm always appreciative of those reviewers out there who can incorporate that into their critiques. And obviously there's definitely still place for things like Steam reviews, where they're letting you know exactly like, hey, there's a lot of microtransactions here, there's the developers did something scummy, so now I'm giving negative reviews. Like there's place for that and there's value to it. But I worry that sometimes we get so detached to just how we actually feel when we experience these pieces of art, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately that's what makes art so important, is the emotional side of it. So any kind of sharing of that is stuff I always appreciate. But that's kind of like a separate tangent. Another thing I wanted to ask about, since we're just checking off all of the art forms on the list. You also spent a little bit. You have a little bit of experience in hosting a podcast too, right? In which you actually do something similar, where you talk more about games on more of the emotional side, right? Can you kind of explain your thought process behind starting that, and whether or not you might return to it, and just your overall experience with it?
Yeah, so this was kind of a test project that I did last summer, and it is actually this is one of those ideas. There's a lot of shows that I've like kind of tried over the years, and then I'm like, I don't know if I'll come back to that. But this one, I like the idea of it enough that I definitely want to return to it. And it was basically just the idea of sitting someone down, like any sort of guest, and just asking them their question of, what's your favorite video game? And I don't even remember exactly where that concept kind of originated from, but I found that was a really good question just to start a conversation with someone, because no matter what your level of like interest is in games or anything, you're still going to have a favorite game. Like if I asked my mom, like, what's your favorite video game? She'd still be able to say like, oh, like I like Dr. Mario. Like I had a good experience with that, or I have good memories of this game. So everyone, it's a question that's always going to have an answer, but it also, it can go in so many different directions, because like, we're not talking about what's do you think's the best game, and then like talking about like all these like how do you define the best and everything. It's just what is that person's like personal favorite game, or at least what comes to their mind first whenever they're asked that.
For sure.
And exploring that from like the impact they have on people, like why a game is someone's favorite, like if they just really click like with the actual game design, or if something special like happened in their life that they like associate with that. Like there's an infinite amount of reasons that could that someone could have a favorite of any form of medium. And it's I at the time that I started, and it's something I still like truly believe in, was that like talking about like the positives, or like just why someone is really into like video games is such a more like interesting conversation, at least from my point of view, than like why do you hate this, or like what are problems in the games industry, and like obviously like problems in the games industry and everything, like obviously people should be talking about that,
for sure.
But I don't feel I'm as like qualified, like I'm not an investigative like journalist or anything like that, and I'll call attention to like BS when I see it and everything, and try to be as helpful as possible. But I feel like as someone that likes to entertain people and be like a comedian and everything, I felt that was a really good launching point to just have a nice like positive conversation with someone about an industry that I feel like really, really, really passionate about.
Yeah, well, and you know, like you said, there's infinite amount of stuff to talk about. Even if you were to ask someone the question, they both bring up the same game, nobody's going to have the exact same experience with it, right? It's such an intimate relationship between the player and the audience and the art, to tie it back into stuff that's already been said. But and I found that the more years I go into listening to game critique and whatnot, I find that there's a severe lack of that kind of discussion, at least in my general vicinity. Maybe I'm not reaching far enough, but I always crave those kind of discussions. So I basically I think it's a really good format, and I hope you return to it at some point, because I'd love to see more of those true pieces of emotion that you just hear from people. And,
thank you. I think that like literally one of the best like conversations you can have with someone is just like when anyone like vents about something they're really passionate about, or like something they love. Like those are just the best things to listen to, even if you don't like understand like most of the stuff people are saying. Like
hearing their passion is enough.
Yeah, it's like you're happy for them. It's like I don't know all the like minutia of like this fighting game that you're talking about, and like why it's like just so good, but like I'm happy for you. Like I'm glad that it, like from what they know of it, that it's like hitting those boxes for them. And
what's funny is the games with the most emotional responses from people are the emotions don't typically come from particularly the mechanics themselves, and yet the mechanics of a game seem to be the most discussed part in game critique. Talking about, you know, they'll break it down into like story, music, gameplay, and stuff like that. And I think ultimately, if you entirely talk about mechanics, there is going to be a level of stagnant in what you hear and say, because there's a level of, if objectivity exists, it would exist with mechanics with regards to game critique, right? With something being good or bad. But hearing specifically people's stories about older games, which typically, have mechanics that might not be as fleshed out as mechanics from games now, you just get to hear a separate side of the discussion, and you're no longer doing historical critique on it. You're just hearing a response of something important to someone. And Yeah, I basically really crave that, but I don't mean to stay on the podcast topic forever. But I do think an interesting question to ask after that would be just because you've been on the platform for so long and you've tried many different styles of creating your content, what do you think is what are the things that you've kind of let go of in your creating process? And is there like a core that you've always kind of held on to with regards to making work? Like, is there one string of consistency that you felt through everything that you've created on the platform?
That's a difficult one because I started doing YouTube like literally a couple months after my 18th birthday, and now like I'm 26 now, on my way to 27. So I did a lot of like growing up, from like when I started my channel to like later on, like and even like the early years. Like I think I literally was like doing this during like over the biggest years of change of my life, and like I would see myself kind of as a mostly different person than when I started. So
Right.
I think one of the things that I kind of have dropped in the back half of my career was there was I used to have kind of a lot more of the typical like video game humor, like kind of making fun of like bad games and stuff like that. Like I did a whole bunch of like the Sonic the Hedgehog bashing and like things like that. Like that's a whole a whole like meme on my channel and everything. But over time, just as YouTube kind of changed and it became like more and more popular for like all these like reaction vids and more people to like talk about games, and just as it became more popular for like these like gaming sins videos and everything like that, and kind of a more like negative outlook on like this is why this game's the worst, or like the game that ended this franchise and everything. As that became like more popular, I kind of started to draw away like from my part in that, and like so these days like I don't like whenever they announce a new Sonic game, like I don't like make fun of that and things, because I'm a lot more in the perspective like if just because a video game series like doesn't particularly like do it for me, like obviously there's a lot of fans, so I'm a lot more of a like live and let live kind of like perspective now. Just any of the like combative elements of like running a YouTube channel that I might have like indulged in like a bit earlier on, I feel like that by this point that's just like it's not worth it. And it's a lot better to just like go hard like for the things that you enjoy, and like always like be doing stuff kind of in good faith and like with good humor and stuff like that. And so in terms of stuff that I feel like I've kept consistent the entire way through, I think that core of like both offering like something valuable to people and like entertaining them at the same time, like I think that has been, even if I couldn't fully articulate that, I've always kind of like really felt strongly about mixing those two avenues. So yeah, if I had to give an answer, but But the question like immediately kinds to bring to mind like, wow, like I'm really different from like the outlook I had on like.
So I mean, it's been a learning experience, basically, a creative journey of finding what that core might be as time has gone on, right? And do you feel more confident in your work's purpose nowadays, or do you feel like you're still kind of looking?
Well, I feel like for me personally, because I'm kind of at the point where like I don't make the 64 Things Wrong videos at the moment. It's been a while since the last episode of Really Freakin Clever, because those videos, I don't know how much you want to talk about like the business side of like YouTube and stuff, but like,
I love everything. Go for it.
I used to because I took a bunch of hiatuses in recent years, some mental health stuff and things like that, and kind of like reassessing like what I want to do creatively, and that's kind of what eventually led me to realizing I want music to be a part of my creative life again. But during all that, I think what was the question again? I think I got kind of off track there.
I'm just curious if like now that you've kind of started again with music and making a little bit more of a return to YouTube, do you feel that your purpose in what you create, does that become more clear to you, or do you feel like you're still kind of looking for that with regards to like a core or something that you have to articulate to other people, basically?
Yeah, I with the music and what I've been doing on streams lately, I feel like I'm at the point where I know a lot more about myself and like what I want to accomplish like creatively.
Sure.
I think I'm still working out like how exactly like
the vehicle to get it there, basically.
Yeah, what's the best way at the moment, because they're like YouTube's always changing, like algorithms are always changing.
For sure.
And yeah, I was going to say like I've taken a few hiatuses, and I used to think that like really messed with like my YouTube metrics, and that was why like, oh, like people don't, whenever I put out a video, like it's getting less views than it used to and stuff. And for a while I just assumed that was because I hadn't uploaded on YouTube like really consistently and the algorithm was really mad. But that it's kind of a common refrain I've been hearing from like people that also like are around my size or like started around that time, is that just views and like the type of YouTube that we do, like kind of that niche of like Nintendo commentary, like analysis and everything. It's a lot rougher out there in terms of like what YouTube will show to people and what it actually like just how everything works. So that's something that I'm still trying to figure out as I kind of dip my toes back into like regular content creation again, is like how does this work these days, because everything is always changing. But in terms of actually what I'm making, I do feel like with a lot of reflection and everything, I'm a lot more solid on what I want to be doing and like the point of it. I how I kind of felt with this podcast was I in 2020, amidst all the quarantine stuff, I'd kind of rediscovered what it was that I had my purpose in this content and the field of entertainment. And I basically went to the drawing boards and I had to think like, what's an effective way to actually deliver this message? What can I use as a vehicle? And it ended up being podcast working out relatively well for me in that front, right? But ultimately, as long as you still have that core and that purpose of something you want to share, the vehicle will eventually build itself, right? Like ultimately that's what shines in your content. And I'm glad that you feel like you have more of a handle on that now. So do you feel like you would ever take maybe your creative drive off of YouTube into other platforms, like possibly in further in the music industry or maybe in something you physically make, or do you still feel like YouTube is still the best place to effectively get your purpose across? Yeah, so I've in recent years, I don't like see myself as like strictly, I guess, like a YouTuber anymore, because I guess my outlook now is like YouTube is just one part of like the larger kind of like online like sphere now. Absolutely. And that's kind of like we have such a crossover now between like people that got big in like movies or doing stuff on YouTube, like people that got started on YouTube like get specials with Netflix or like do like there's just so much different crossover, and a lot of the walls between like different mediums seem to be kind of breaking down. So that sounds kind of pretentious, but I guess I try to kind of view myself as like I'm an entertainer, like I'm trying to offer out like what I can and like my kind of unique perspective and skills to the world. And and at the moment, like YouTube is still kind of one of the best ways to be able to independently like get myself out there, because like YouTube, like I don't need like a production company or anything like that. Like it's still, I have a channel and I have people that want to see my stuff. So YouTube's still kind of the best avenue at the moment for that. But I guess I don't see myself as like tied to YouTube or anything, and because there is like other projects, like I've worked on like scripts for for potentially like an independent film or something like that. And I've
Sure.
done like a little bit of acting on television and stuff locally. So it's all kind of building kind of myself up as an entertainer,
Absolutely.
and less being beholden to like a specific platform.
Right, because we're ultimately creators who are not bound by the means at which we get our work out there. We can go other places and still have
Exactly. Like, and
Yeah.
that, I guess that's like a benefit of being a YouTuber, is that like if you have an idea for another like medium or something, you can't, like, you're not signed into a contract that you
Right.
can't do anything else.
Yeah. Well, and I think that might lead to another interesting question. Have you had many occupations outside of YouTube that were also creative, that you maybe had things about it that you liked or didn't like? Like, to what extent have you mixed creating with working, basically? Because obviously YouTube is also relatively, it is work for you as well as creating,
Mhm.
and I'm curious if you've had any conflicts of those merging or any other experience with that in general.
I haven't really had a whole lot of conflict, because I was really lucky. I started my YouTube channel while I was at university, and by the time that I kind of finished my degree and was ready, like at the point where I would have to start like looking for jobs with the degree, I was at the point where I could pretty much do YouTube full time,
Right.
and so I was kind of able to go direct from university to that. So and during university, like the summer jobs to kind of keep myself going, explicitly like weren't creative based.
Right.
And I remember at the time that was like kind of a real struggle, where I was like, I don't want to be like sitting at a desk like just typing stuff. Like
Right.
I want to be making dumb jokes about Zelda. And
Sure.
and so eventually I was able to do that for a few years. But just with the way that YouTube has been going, I actually did have to start doing some other contract work. And I'd actually just started a gig doing social media for some grocery companies in Canada here. And I'd started doing that a couple months before COVID began. And then unfortunately kind of lost that job. It was as a downsizing thing. Due to COVID. So I didn't get to have a whole lot of experience
Right.
going from being a YouTuber to suddenly having to use those skills in like in a professional environment. But
Right.
for the couple months I was able to do that, that was actually a really, really interesting kind of change of pace to suddenly, from having gone to like running my own like a position where I was kind of like the be all like end all creative, because at
Right.
the end of the day, like it was my name on the videos, and I would do most of the work myself. And even if I did like commission out anything, like I still had like kind of complete control. Whereas
For
now, like it was much more of like a big group project, and like I had this boss definitely has to approve my work, and I need like this
Right.
person's approval and everything. So it was a bit of a difficult transition in that way, but I think it was a really good experience to have, because like on bigger projects, like it's really rare that you're going to be like the one that's in complete creative control. And I think like collaboration and that sort of thing is such an important skill to be able to have. And so I kind of got a crash course in that for a few months before COVID started, and
Right.
it was really, really eye-opening and interesting.
Yeah, so you still felt that was a creative endeavor, managing the social accounts. Like, did you still find yourself doing similar things?
Yeah,
that you do
so
with
it
YouTube?
was social media, and then it was like a lot of graphic design work, and there was even like a few like designing grocery store like flyers and everything. And it was but like all my Photoshop skills from having to make like YouTube thumbnails
Right.
over the years, like actually was a huge perk for that
imagine.
position. Yeah. And so it's definitely a really weird thing to have be like the bulk of my resume, that like I was self-sufficient on a YouTube channel for like 7 to 8 years, but it does have some crossover with the industries I've kind of found myself in since.
Yeah, and did you find that during that time it made you more excited to go back and work on your own personal projects? Like, did you feel more excited to stream or work on other things because you spent time away from it?
Yeah, it was a huge thing for me, and I won't get like too much into it, but
Sure.
I was like at just the level of like size of a YouTuber where it was like if I did everything, or I guess YouTuber and streamer at this point, but if
Right.
I did like everything right, like had a good week of or a good month of streaming and like everything went well, like I was good money wise, but like if
Right.
anything like would slip up, I was on I was basically going in the direction where like if any slip ups happened, like I wouldn't be able to make like rent that month or something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And so it was that like precarious position of like I was able to do full time like content creation, but like only barely. And so if anything, like
Yeah.
there was always that stress of like if I don't get like like hit my allotment of like brand deals, or like if I'm sick this month and like
Right.
or just like aren't feeling like mentally well enough to like stream like every day this week or something, like there was so much pressure to like have to be creative and like have to be on, and for that to be like my sole source of income whenever the line was like that
Yeah.
close to like whether it was a financial problem or not. I think like whenever I got the social media job and suddenly it was like, oh, like I'm making like a steady wage now,
Right.
like in return for my creative stuff, that was such a healthier
Yeah.
situation for me as a creative, or to
Yeah.
not be like, if I just do one more video, maybe I'll
Definitely.
have extra spending money this month. And so I'm not sure yet if it was just because of the different nature of the work I was doing, or just
Sure.
because it was like this is a set like paycheck and everything.
Yeah.
But that was a huge weight like off my mind, and it made whenever there was a lot of times that I'd like get home and like not be in a creative mood because I've been like
Right.
kind of burnt out from like being on Photoshop all day.
Absolutely.
But I think it was overall worth it to have the stress of like have the money stress be disconnected from what I was trying to do
Right.
creatively. Whenever the margins are that thin,
Yeah.
it was a real
So would you say you were overall a little less or more productive when it came to your personal works? Because I've heard the story go either way, where when your brain is always active working on another project, and you're still exercising those creative muscles, as soon as you go back to your personal one, your brain doesn't turn off. It continues to go and you can get more done. I've heard a lot of stories basically of people saying that creative work specifically can help a lot with your personal projects. But also I've heard stories of, like you kind of mentioned earlier, where sometimes you're just burnt out and you spend everything on the work. Would you say overall you were more or less productive with your personal stuff at the time?
That's a tricky one to answer because I feel like I was just getting into the swing of balancing out
Sure.
my like energy of like, okay, like I'll do this at work and then like I'll have a little bit of time at home and stuff. I was
Right.
like just getting into the swing of that whenever COVID kind of like shut everything
Sure, okay.
down. So I don't have as like concrete an answer on that, but
Right.
I feel like I was able to get more kind of creatively done, because even like just during the day, like if I was working on like other stuff or like working on a flyer, like I might randomly have like a lyric idea or like just something
Right.
pop into my head and it would be like, oh, like that's good, and like write that down. Like it seemed like creating and stuff during the day and having that kind of be more structured.
Yeah.
It also meant that like because my brain was like working, like occasionally I would also get like a random offshoot idea. I was like,
Absolutely.
oh, okay, yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, because sometimes just having specific time where you can't work on personal stuff almost makes you think harder about the personal stuff. Like
it's like, oh, I have to work on actual work, so I'm
Right.
gonna procrastinate that
Absolutely.
by like getting ideas for what I actually want to work on. Yeah, like I don't know if that's like necessarily the healthiest reaction.
it's got to
but,
be
like,
the best form of procrastination at the very least.
Yeah, it's at least but yeah, that's definitely kind of a thing where just like ideas would like pop in when you're trying to work on other stuff, and it was like those ideas wouldn't pop up unless like I was kind of in that zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely was like a lot of nights where it was like I've been in front of a computer too much today, like I just can't. But I think overall, kind of having my mind like in that zone for like someone else, and then being able to occasionally like put it towards my own stuff, I think that was overall helped structure me a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I work for my school as a video editor, and it's mostly just lectures and stuff and things that aren't entirely interesting to me specifically. So whenever I'm like putting it off, with the editor open, I can't help but think like, well, what if I tried editing this for this video or something like that, right? Like your brain will try to do anything except think on what it's actually supposed to think about.
Yeah.
But because of that, I feel like I've come up with so many ideas that I normally wouldn't, just because my brain was already prone to working. It just was working on the wrong thing. And I always find that fascinating. But anyway, I don't mean to stay on that forever. Yeah. So since we're getting a little bit closer to wrapping up time, the question I wanted to ask you is just, and this is a question I ask every guest, if you could give your past self one piece of advice when you began your creative journey, what piece of advice do you think you'd give him? Now, I understand it's a difficult question. I'll give you a little bit to think about it. But, you can shape it into something else. You can shape it into maybe just something you've learned, some valuable piece of information, something you see in other creators that nowadays that you wish they understood going in, since you've been around for so long at this point. What kind of advice would that be, basically? Even if it's not like the number one piece, just anything that might help someone out there listening to this who are just starting out in either the YouTube scene or really any creative scene in general.
Yeah, I think I really agree with what you said about you need to be making like what you want to do, and I think there's kind of there's a mixture between planning stuff out like before you get started, and that idea of
finding it along the way, kind of.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting mixture of that, because whenever I started YouTube, I feel like it was even more important to kind of have ideas kind of set in stone from the idea, or like to have a good hook to like get people in. I think a good hook is pretty important, but it seems to me that I guess recently with YouTube, it seems like things are a lot more kind of freeform, and like there's kind of less restrictions on that. Like people have a lot like wilder thumbnails, or like don't feel the need to like organize stuff into like series as much as they used to. Right. So I think it's I hate having to give like the advice like find a balance, because like finding that balance is way easier said than done. Sure. But it's that idea of like having a hook so that you're able to easily explain to people like kind of what you're doing or what makes you unique, or like something to entice people in. But at the same time, like so much of doing creative work and kind of figuring out like what you actually want from a show, you can only find that by doing. It's like like there's so many sitcoms that like people will say like it doesn't get good till like season 2 or like halfway through the first season, because it's like that's whenever like the actors and the writers like really kind of like finally figured out, oh, this is what this character is, and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's that idea of like put work into it. Like don't just like if you want to be a creator and like grow and like be make an art out of this, you need to like put some thought into it and figure out like why you're doing it, because otherwise you're kind of just always scrambling. But at the same time,
you still have to actually do it too, basically.
Yeah, you need to like actually do it, but then also I guess like if you feel like you're being tugged in a different direction, or like you want to do something else that you didn't like quite realize until then, like don't be afraid to kind of like experiment with that, because like with all the complaints that there is about like YouTube and like algorithms and things like that, like this is a platform where at the end of the day, like you're your own boss, like you get to make your what you want to make. So like take advantage of that. If you're in a position where you get to make stuff and you don't have like a corporate like overlord or like a producer that's like you need to do this thing, like take advantage of that freedom and don't be afraid to explore a little bit beyond what you've planned. So I think I don't know if it's like a Stephen King quote or something, but he says something about he'll outline every now and then, but he always does it in very faint pencils so that if he has to, he can go outside the bounds or something. I might be misquoting that or thinking of the wrong author.
It sounds good either way. It sounds like
that kind of idea.
Advice. Yeah. Well, and I think what better time to experiment with what you want to do than at the start, right? It's not like you have any stakes anyway, right? So I think, this is also a similar experience to me, but looking at the greats and seeing other people do great things, like nowadays people probably look at a channel like Scott the Woz or something and think like, I want to make exactly that kind of content. If you ever feel a tug away from that, then you shouldn't ignore it, especially when you're first starting off. Because ultimately there are so many different ways you can drive your content, and sometimes some formats are just not as good as others for you, basically. So I think that's good advice, and also unique advice too. That's what's nice about this question, is that it never yields the exact same answer, and I appreciate your specifications of balance specifically, and I think that could help people out there. So I'm going to move on to the last question I want to ask today, which is just basically another question I usually ask a lot of creators, and that's just how you've been creatively handling everything going on in 2020, and now, of course, post-2020, even though we might still actually be in 2020. So I'm just curious on a creative level how that may have affected you. I don't mean to pry into anything personal or anything like that, but just whether or not you've indulged in more content, you've felt more inspired to make things, less inspired. What's been your general reaction to everything going on?
Honestly, like the lockdown and everything, like it hit me really hard. Yeah, because I mentioned that like I had like a social media job, and I kind of feel like I was just getting that balance of like me as a creator and like balancing out my life between like making stuff and kind of the rest of my life. And then COVID kind of hit like just whenever I was like right on the verge of like kind of getting my shit together, for lack of a better term. And so that was like last summer, like whenever we had like the couple months of like lockdown, and then things like seemed like we were kind of going in a better direction. Yeah, if you remember that. Like I started kind of doing like a rebrand on my channel and like updated a bunch of my art assets, and was like, okay, like glad that those few months are over with, but like now it's time to relaunch everything and like take what I've learned from like these few months of self-reflection. And then as things kind of just got worse, and there was some other mental health stuff that I kind of had to deal with. It was just 2020 was like a really difficult year, and it there was kind of multiple levels of like having to reassess like why am I like a creator, and like what do I enjoy about this. And so I think it was a year where everyone kind of did a lot of soul searching, because like what else are you gonna do when you're locked out? So I didn't from like a normal content creation like standpoint, I didn't really get like a whole lot done during quarantine. Like there was the few months like last summer, but then after that, like it was I kind of just had to focus on myself and like my life outside of YouTube and staying healthy in that way. But so to kind of like end that on like an optimistic note though, was eventually for the back half of or I guess the first half of 2021, I went back and moved in with my parents for 5 months to help them out with some things. And I specifically, that was whenever I learned guitar, because up until that point, the only instrument I really knew was like music theory and chords on the piano, singing and drums.
Right.
And so I taught myself, with the help of a friend, guitar, like over the winter months this year.
Okay.
And I specifically wasn't doing it like as a content creation thing. Like I wasn't like, I'm going to put out a song or anything. Like this is just this is a thing for me, something I can focus on, like off camera and everything. And so it was because of learning guitar that I like realized, oh, like I haven't been doing as much music stuff the last few years. Like I really miss that. And so now, like as time's kind of got on, I've gotten more comfortable, and I'm like at the point where I'm like, okay, I want to start like presenting this to people. I think I can like do stuff with this. I want to share these songs that I wrote over the past few months with people. And I have written a few songs, and like, so it was a creatively satisfying time, like the last few months, even if I wasn't putting out content, and kind of, I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, I'm in a better spot now. I have these songs in my head and everything, and so now I'm like figuring out the best way to like put them out into the world and kind of take advantage of all the kind of soul searching that went on over the course of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that it had a little bit of an uptick around the end. It still is such a saga, and there's pinpoints of lows and a little bit higher lows, right, all throughout.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that ultimately, as we are hopefully coming to a close with that saga, you are feeling more creatively inspired than when you went into it, with regards to, refining your passion for music production and stuff like that. And I hope that kind of continues throughout 2021 as we figure out this new year.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for joining me here. And, of course, thank you to all of you watching out there. If you would like to check out Really Freakin Clever, also known as Josh, then, of course, you can go to his YouTube channel, as well as many other places, right? Would you care to plug anything that you have going on in your life?
Yeah, so I just put out my first rock and roll single literally yesterday. So if you look up Josh Busker on Spotify, my new hit single, Zillion Million, is out now. So if you want to check that out. It's also up on my YouTube channel, a lyric video. So that's my current kind of creative focus, is working on this album that'll hopefully be coming out this year. But I also do a bunch of Twitch streaming every now and then at twitch.tv/Really Freakin Clever. So that's where you can find me if you're looking for me these days.
For sure. And the best place to be updated on any new things that arrive would probably be Twitter. Is that correct?
Yes. I also be found on Twitter at Freakin Clever.
Well, there you go. So make sure you guys check out Josh and everything that he's doing over there. Check out his music video, of course. And then also, thank you so much for listening to this. If you'd like to check out anything that we've talked about in a more condensed form, you can find highlights over on my channel. And of course, if you're here on Patreon, thank you so much for your support. And we are now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any other place you'd like to listen to podcasts. So feel free to tune in over there to see any of the public podcasts available. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next episode. So long.
Bye-bye.